Hi guys, welcome back. In today's video, we're talking about the semicolon. We'll talk about how to use a semicolon, so the grammatical aspect of it, and then we'll talk about when to use it. So in what situation you should choose a semicolon. Let's first talk about grammar and how to use a semicolon. So the first bullet here says it ends an independent clause. So at the end of my independent clause, I'm going to have a semicolon. And then another independent clause follows. So here's my other independent clause that follows the semicolon. So this is just, I guess, a harder way to say that it goes between two independent clauses. Please note here that after the semicolon, when you start a brand new independent clause, you are not going to capitalize that first word. You're only going to capitalize it if it's capitalized anyway, like someone's name or a country or any other proper nouns. But just overall, generally speaking, you're not going to capitalize that first word after a semicolon. But before we move on, what's an independent clause? I said that a semicolon should go between two independent clauses. So we have to have an understanding of what an independent clause is. So a clause always contains a subject and a verb. Okay, easy. Independent clause can stand by itself, meaning if it's by itself, it's a full sentence on its own. For example, she woke up is an independent clause. Here's my subject, verb, and it's a sentence by itself, so it's an independent clause. An example of a dependent clause. So an example that is not an independent clause is when she woke up. Ooh, please excuse my writing. Notice that when she woke up is a clause because it has subject and verb, but when she woke up is not an independent clause. It's not a sentence by itself. I need to know more to finish this sentence. When she woke up, she was surprised, right? We need something else to finish this sentence. So this is an example of a dependent clause. If I'm going to use a semicolon, I need to only use an independent clause like this one. So an independent clause, it's subject and verb that could stand by itself as its own sentence. So we just talked about the grammatical aspect of semicolons. It's independent clause, semicolon, independent clause. But when should you use a semicolon? That's when your two ideas, so your two independent clauses, are very closely related in idea. And it's often for also stylistic purposes when you're writing. For example, I would use a semicolon in a sentence like this. It was my first time at Grand Canyon. It was breathtaking. Here, I use a semicolon because I feel that these two independent clauses are very close in idea. It's my first time at Grand Canyon. It was breathtaking. Instead of the semicolon, if you wanted to, you can say, it was my first time at Grand Canyon, comma, and it was breathtaking. Or you can say, it was my first time at Grand Canyon, period, and start a whole new sentence. It was breathtaking. Let me tell you why I would use a semicolon instead of these two other options. So the first other option is, it was my first time at Grand Canyon, comma, and it was breathtaking. Just the sound of the word and, as the writer, I just don't want it there. I don't like the way it sounds. I want it to be, it was my first time at Grand Canyon, it was breathtaking. I don't want that word and. This is the example, this will be an example of stylistic purposes. Just for the way it looks and sounds, just the style of my writing, I don't want that word and in there. If you look at this sentence, it was my first time at Grand Canyon, period. It was breathtaking. There's nothing wrong grammatically with all of these three sentences. But if I put a period there, a period in my mind creates a wall, a very thick wall between this sentence and this sentence. And the wall acts to separate these two sentences. Again, there's nothing wrong with it grammatically. There's no grammatical error in any of these three. But I don't like this one because of the way it sounds for style. And here, I don't like it because I feel like it separates my two sentences too much, these two ideas too much. Therefore, I like this, a semicolon, where a semicolon indicates that I feel like these two are so closely related and I don't want that extra word, like this coordinating conjunction. I wanted to read. It was my first time at Grand Canyon. It was breathtaking. Here's another example. So I got my sisters the same gifts for Christmas. Number 1 says Jane loved it, Joe wasn't thrilled. 2, Jane loved it, but Joe wasn't thrilled. 3, Jane loved it, period. Joe wasn't thrilled. 4, Jane loved it, comma, Joe wasn't thrilled. So they all kind of sound the same, I know. Right from the beginning, I just want to let you know that you cannot use this type of sentence. You cannot do independent clause, comma, independent clause. This is such a common mistake that I see everywhere on social media and in college classrooms. It doesn't matter where. It's a mistake we see everywhere. So you are not allowed to use a comma between two independent clauses. So these are your options. The first one again, Jane loved it, semicolon, Joe wasn't thrilled. This is a perfect place to use a semicolon because these two sentences, these two ideas are very much related. Therefore, I can use a semicolon here. Number 2 says Jane loved it, but Joe wasn't thrilled. Of course, this is also grammatically correct, but if you don't like the sound of the word but there, and you like the sound of this, then go for number 1. Number 3, Jane loved it, period. Joe wasn't thrilled. I would say this is the least attractive option just because, again, it creates a wall between these two independent clauses. I'm not sure why a writer would choose number 3 as an option. So depending on the effect you're going for, you would probably choose number 1 or 2. After your semicolon, you can also use words like however or therefore or any other adverbial conjunction to link the two independent clauses. It says, I like vanilla. However, she likes chocolate. I'm going to use a semicolon, again, because I feel like these two ideas are very close. The second sentence says, it's going to rain. Therefore, I came prepared. Again, these two ideas are very closely related, then I can use a semicolon. We can also use a semicolon to break up a complex list. For example, we visited Seoul, Korea, Tokyo, Japan, Rome, Italy, and Paris, France. So clearly this is city, country, city, country, city, country, and city, country. If I did not use a semicolon here, it would be really complicated, right? It would be Seoul, comma, Korea, comma, Tokyo, comma, Japan, comma, Rome, comma, Italy, comma, and Paris, comma, France, period. So it would just be very complicated to understand, whereas here it's clearly a comma between the city, country, semicolon, city, country, semicolon, city, country. So this is what we mean by breaking up complex lists if it's just easier for us to understand. Here I wanted to talk about some common mistakes. The first sentence says, it was my first time at Grand Canyon. It was breathtaking. Again, I touched on this, but you cannot have a comma between two independent clauses. There are many ways to fix this sentence, but this is not it, right? So we just cannot have a comma over here. The second sentence says, it was my first time at Grand Canyon, which was breathtaking. What do you think is wrong with this sentence? So right here, instead, if you want to keep the exact words of this sentence, it's going to change to a comma. It was my first time at Grand Canyon, comma, which was breathtaking. That's perfect. Which was breathtaking is not an independent clause. Therefore, it cannot come after a semicolon, right? So a semicolon cannot be used in this sentence because, like I said, it's independent clause, semicolon, independent clause. This is not an independent clause. The third sentence says, it was my first time at Grand Canyon. It was breathtaking. What do you think is wrong with this one? Because I use the semicolon here, if it's a common noun, we do not capitalize it. So we're going to use a lowercase I for it. It was breathtaking. So the correct sentence is this last one. It was my first time at Grand Canyon, semicolon. It was breathtaking. Well, that's it for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found that helpful, and if you have any questions, please write them down below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And if you did find this helpful, please like this video and consider subscribing to this channel. I'll see you guys next time.